Not too surprised to see that over 40% of you voted to see my Floodborn control deck that was Steel and Amethyst, given the success we've had with other Floodborn color combinations already. And so on screen, this is what you're seeing. Now, I'm not going to go over this deck list card by card like I've done in previous videos because you should already know what Steel and Amethyst do at this point, so we don't need to break down the same cards over and over again. Like, why do we play Madam Mim? Because it's very overstated and broken, probably the best package in the game. Why do we play Steel Beast? Well, because it's probably the best legendary in the game now, etc. and so forth. If you're new to this, basically this deck functions off of the two, when you play a Floodborn, you get X effect characters, in this case Blue Fairy for Amethyst, which lets me draw a card, and Chief Bogo for Steel, which lets me deal 1 damage to all characters on the opponent's board whenever I play a Floodborn. And on the deck here, we have 17 different Floodborn characters, 3 Jafars, 3 Yzma, 4 Beast Tragic Hero, 4 Tinkerbell, which is the only card that we also play the small shift for in the small Tink, and 3 Elsas. The Tinkerbell and the big Elsas are your endgame pieces, and we'll talk about the strengths and weaknesses of this deck in just a moment. But I do want to point out that at 60 cards, we are running only 11 uninkables. There are some top-heavy uninkables in the big Elsas, the Grab Your Swords, the Chief Bogos, but this deck should very easily be able to play on curve, and you shouldn't really run into issues bricking, especially because you play the draw cards from Amethyst. So in theory and on paper, this deck looks extremely strong, and it is. I went 7-0 with it in my first 7 matches. Then the next day I played about 5. I lost 1 against the Ruby Amethyst, which was kind of close. But that leads me to the weakness of the deck. And the main weakness of this deck is when you face other decks in the meta that are potentially high endgame character drops, basically. So what do I mean by that? Like Ruby Amethyst control, when they start dropping Maleficent Dragons, Elsas, etc., you have a hard time outing big bodies because Steel only pings damage, so you have to combine that with other cards to challenge, and sometimes that puts you behind on card advantage. Like if they drop a Maleficent Dragon, they've already gone +1 off of it, and you have to put multiple resources likely into that Maleficent Dragon in order to take it off field, otherwise it's going 3 for 1, 4 for 1, who knows, right? So you're already 3 for 1ing yourself to deal with that threat, which is a problem. And other Steel decks that have resist, so big Cinderella and even things like the big Hercules, these things are very hard for this deck to get over because Steel versus Steel is a very tough matchup. Against pretty much everything else in the meta, this deck should dominate because early and mid game, you just lock everything down, you out advantage your opponent, and you out damage everything because the Steel cards are controlling the board so well early game. Let's go ahead and take a look at the first match. So to start off, we're going to put back our uninkable cards, which are also high costing, and we just want to draw into more inkables so that we can play better on curve. And perfect, we draw into our lowest costing Floodborn character, and we have 2 Blue Fairies. So we're just going to ink and pass. The opponent is going to be on Ruby Amethyst, so again, the most popular deck in the format. And they are playing some stuff that I thought was spice, but I've been seeing it more and more, and that was the Evasive Mini. So yeah, I guess that card is kind of a unique tech option for the deck. Regardless, though, on turn 2, we're going to go ahead and drop Blue Fairy, and at this point, I'm all fully committed to double Blue Fairy because turn 4, we have the Jafar drop to draw 2. The opponent is essentially just doing Ruby Amethyst things, bouncing back some cards, trying to maintain card advantage and tempo to a certain degree by keeping those overstated Mim cards on board. But we're going to keep inking here and just generate our advantage early and pass turn. Because they have the Pascal, it makes it so that we're not going to be able to quest with the Blue Fairy, otherwise we do risk losing them. The opponent, once again, just playing a little slow, but they do have a 4 lore advantage, but again, taking that card advantage where they can with the Mim cards. Now, since there's nothing for the Jafar to challenge and draw, we're just going to use Friends on the other side to draw 2, ink a Friends on the other side, and this is when I was testing out the Mim Floodborn, and again, it's not really that great because essentially you need to see it with one of your Floodborn characters, like, or, you know, Floodborn advantage generating characters like the Blue Fairy or the Chief Bogo, and then you essentially only really will use it with the Jafar to drop and challenge right away. Otherwise, it's not really good. So, you know, it's nice as a 5-drop Floodborn, but I'd rather just have Beast Tragic Hero, so it is what it is. Regardless, though, at this point, we end up clearing the opponent's board, sacking one of our Blue Fairies because we've drawn a ton of cards off of this thing already, and with the Friends on the other side. We have 3 uninkable Elsas in hand, but we have board board presence and card advantage. But we are getting up into that 6, 7, 8 ink range, and like I talked about in the beginning, this is where Ruby Amethyst can be very powerful. We've only been able to equalize the lore count at 4 apiece, and now this is where Ruby Amethyst can potentially start clawing back a lot of advantage. On turn 7, I do overcommit with the Merlin Rabbit and the Tinkerbell, and my opponent rightfully punishes me with a Be Prepared, but I don't think it was that big of a misplay because it essentially forced out the Be Prepared there by overextending with that Tinkerbell, and I did draw an extra card off of my Merlin Rabbit. The opponent though has their own Rabbit, and with the Mim cards, once again they're going to be able to cycle and gain advantage off of the draw. They're going to continue to ink to keep up with us, but we still have the advantage. With the Goat on field questing, we're feeling okay. We're going to be able to bounce back the Goat here. And again, probably not the best play to ink the Tinkerbell and overextend once again with the Goat just to get it on field. But I was really putting my opponent on, I don't think you have a second Be Prepared, and that was kind of stupid. I know one of their cards are Merlin Rabbit, but yes, they do have the second Be Prepared. We are now ahead in the lore count, and it is 5 cards to 2 for my opponent. We drop a Chief Bogo with 4 Floodborns in hand, so we're looking pretty good, but the opponent does have a lot of ink, and they do have these draw characters in the Rabbit and the Maleficent. Do they have yet another Mim card? No, they just had hard cast of Friends and pass turn, so they got 3 cards in hand. They're feeling pretty healthy, and at this point now we can start locking things down with the Elsa. Chief Bogo will deal 1 damage to everything as well, and going through 2 of their Be Prepared already is actually good, meaning they only have 2 more board clears left in their deck. And we're going to take out a Rabbit here with the Chief Bogo, which is kind of sus because they likely just have more Rabbits in hand anyways. And I do put myself at risk of being Mauied and or Madam Mim Foxed again on the Chief Bogo. Regardless though, the opponent is once again showing why Ruby Amethyst is probably the best deck in the format, because just like that on the basically play of a Maleficent Dragon, they've regained tempo and board control. However, with this Merlin into Yzma play, we're going to be able to draw 3 and deal 1 damage to everything. And I'm going to say to my opponent, well, since I'm ahead in lore, I don't really need this Chief Bogo to put in that much work, so I'm just going to quest with it. The opponent trades their Mim Snake, hard casts a Friend on the other side here, and then drops a mini Evasive and a Maleficent to draw a card. They have 2 ink left. They're going to quest with their Dragon and then LeFou ready it. And they know we're not on Be Prepared, but we do have a couple of answers that could potentially throw the opponent off here. So we're just going to go ahead and drop Tinkerbell and then smash away Dragon. And now the opponent essentially only has just like a couple of weenies on board that should be fairly manageable to deal with. So we're just going to pass, and anything that they quest with beyond the Evasive, the Tinkerbell will deal with it, right? Unless they have removal for it. And so they could lose their whole board with like 1 Tinkerbell swing. They're going to go ahead and Teeth and Ambitions, which clears out their whole hand, and then crash their LeFou in order to clean up the Yzma here, because we are threatening very close to game with this 14 lore. And on this Elsa play to double tap down, the opponent knows it's over because we're about to wipe their board out with that Tinkerbell, and that's the synergy you can get with this deck. So let's go ahead and take a look at match number 2. So in this matchup here, we're going second. We're going to put back our only uninkable card in the Merlin Rabbit, which we're fine with not seeing until later in the game. And our hand is now full of inkables, which means we should be able to play easily on curve. My opponent starts off by inking a steel card, and we're going to drop our hook since we can always bounce it back with the Mim cards if we need it to use this ink later. The opponent reveals Emerald, Steel, and a discard deck at that, which again, with a draw deck like this, with Beast Tragic Heroes and the Amethyst draw card, shouldn't be a problem, right? Well, it can be to a certain extent because Steel deals with our smaller characters as well. Just like how we deal with their smaller characters, they deal with ours. So they're going to go ahead and sing a Sudden Chill after dropping a Prince John, and we're going to discard our Elsa since it likely has very little application in this matchup here, so it's not a big deal. But they are drawing cards from that Prince John, which can be a problem. We're going to go ahead and drop Tinkerbell and then pass with the anticipation that we're going to shift Tinkerbell next turn. They ink a Beast Relentless and then play a Sudden Chill, which forces me to discard my Madam Mim here, and then they're going to draw a card off the John. And then they play yet another Sudden Chill. So of course I'm going to keep Tinkerbell. And now the opponent seems to have much more advantage than me. 4 cards in hand to our 1. But I play discard, and I know how this weakness, or what the weakness of this deck is and how to exploit their weakness. And basically they can't deal with a big board. Like, it's very tough for them to deal with a big board. They either don't play the necessary cards to out big boards, like other Steel Cinderellas, etc., or they just try to use things like the Evasive Flynn in order to just try to outrace you, which can work, but it's very tough, especially if they're going up against steel, which obviously we are, since, hey, there it is, the Flynn Rider, his own biggest fan, and we can just smash that away easily or ping it away with any number of cards that we play. So the opponent ends up going to time here because they don't really know what to do, I guess, if they should quest or pass, and they just end up letting the timer go and passing their turn because they know if they quest with the Flynn, we can discard nothing pretty much because whatever we draw, we ink and we play, and then deal 2 damage with the Tinkerbell onto their evasive Flynn, and they don't want that. So at this point now, I'm just going to quest for 3 with the hook and the Tinkerbell because I'm putting my opponent on. I don't think you can deal with my board. If you want to trade into the hook, be my guest. They're not going to use the Flint to challenge. They're going to quest for 2 instead. Now at this point, I could have played Maleficent Sorceress first since I drew 2 off Beast Tragic Hero, and then seen if I draw an Inkable in order to play the Smash, and that would just get me the extra body on board. But I didn't want to risk running into an Uninkable and not being able to play both cards. So smashing away one of the Flynn Riders was definitely super clutch there. And of course we drew that off of the Beast Tragic Hero, so you know, just shows you how good this is. My opponent is now kind of debating how can they survive since we're at 16 lore. They're going to go ahead and strengthen by Raging Fire, and then let the Storm Rage on my Tinkerbell away so that they can safely quest without worrying about Tinkerbell getting advantage via dealing damage. Now they're continuing to think what is the best choice because I still have game on board since the Beast Tragic Hero quest for 2. If they throw something into the Beast Tragic Hero, it won't die and their character will die, considering how weak their board is. But they'll prevent my draw 2, which at this point doesn't matter because we are very close to winning the game. The opponent has another Strength of a Raging Fire, which they use to take out our Blue Fairy with. Now we only have 3 quests on board, but of course we draw into Goat, and this is how we can close our game, just like Ruby Amethyst, and just like that, the opponent lost with discard.